If your life has been feeling hopeless lately, stick around for a conversation. Hey there, welcome to Monday Moments, a show in which we take a deeper dive into Sunday's sermon. My name is Travis, your host. Good to be back after a couple of weeks on vacation. Charlie and Daniel have done an excellent job filling in and
we tried
keeping the show going. I think you did a good job. You know, I watched it. It was you did a great job.
Thank you.
And I wish that I had thought to cue the Charlie Brown Christmas music. Christmas time is here, because it's
that,
I wish I had the forethought to do that, because we are starting our Advent series. It is that time of year. If you are part of Freedom Fellowship Church, you know that we focus on Advent every year. And while Advent may be familiar to some, it's not necessarily familiar to all, although I do feel like in the last couple of years, I have noticed that Advent has, I don't want to say like become trending necessarily, but like it has become more of a focus. Like even for some of your non-denominational, your non-liturgical churches, I will say, there has been this maybe resurgence. I'm not exactly sure what the right word is, but of this focus on Advent. And Advent is more than just a remembering of Jesus coming to earth as a baby, being born, but it's a reminder that he is also coming again. Yeah. And that's something that we have emphasized for about as long as I've been here, in different ways. Maybe we focus on Advent, and for those of us, and I'll put myself in this camp, even though I've been part of Freedom now for a good while. I didn't grow up with Advent. I didn't grow up with the candles. We didn't even do like the Advent calendar thing, like that like even that tradition was not a thing for us growing up. And so Advent has been something that is a recent tradition for us, but it's been one that is full of meaning. And so I always love this time of year because it's not just good for me, it's also a really good way, I feel like, to bring kids into this tradition. And of course, we know it's more than a tradition. It's more than a ritual. It's really this teaching. It's this instilling of the significance of this time of year, as well as what's to come. The hope that we have, which is a good segue.
There you go. Perfect.
One of the things that I have come to learn is that the first candle that is lit is the hope candle, and I think it's very common to call it the hope candle. I think what's less common is to call it the prophecy candle. I don't hear that. I don't hear it being referred to that as much as the hope candle, but it's the prophecy candle. So that's what you spoke. That's what you taught on. Was hope and prophecy and how Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah that was foretold in the Old Testament, all throughout even going as far back as Genesis, and you even started in Psalms. And I love that you started. It's like, well, wait, it's Christmas. Shouldn't we be reading Luke chapter 2 or something like that? But you started in Psalms and talking about hope. And so, while it might seem kind of obvious, what hope is all about, and we're all familiar. I think it's a fairly universal concept and construct of hope. We need something to hope in. As well as I do that I'm not going to leave well enough alone and not going to assume anything. So tell me, why is hope even necessary? In this life, why is hope such a universal thing that we all have this thing inside of us that says, I'm hoping for deliverance. And deliverance doesn't necessarily mean eternal circumstances, although it can. I think there's a part of us that we're all hoping for deliverance from something. And that was, and I'm going to stop talking here in a second. I'm processing out loud a little bit. Right? I'm going to not do that because I want to hear from you. The people want to hear from you. They don't want to hear from me. But that's what, the Jews were hoping for deliverance from the Romans, right? There was this hope. And so why is hope necessary to begin with?
I think it is interesting, even the way you mention it. It seems like it's something that we all do. I mean, not just in the context of the scripture or our spiritual journey, but just in general, it's something that like every human being does, right? We whether it's like, oh, the Christmas season coming up, the holiday season coming up, or the next vacation, from little kids to grown-ups, like it's interesting, I think, that we all kind of by default do that. But, going back to the bigger question of like, why do we hope? Why is it necessary? I'm reminded of like in Romans, I can't think of the reference right now, but Paul talks about how even the creation, our earth, this world, the nature is groaning, is waiting for its full redemption, right, and renewal. And so maybe part of it has to do with the effect of sin.
Yeah.
Right. Because before Genesis 3 and before Adam and Eve sinned before God, everything was good. Like it was it. Like they were at the right place, in paradise with God. Life was the way God intended it to be. Right. Everything was satisfying. And so there was nothing to really like look forward to, nothing better to look forward to. Right. I guess you could say. But then sin enters this world. Everything's broken and shattered and marred. There's broken relationships between, human beings and between man and God, right? And even our physical world is marred by it. And like I said yesterday, the whole of Scripture's entire Bible has that anticipation, right? It's waiting for the Messiah to appear, to restore, right? To restore human beings back to God, to restore even this world. And so in Revelation, that's what we see. The promise being fulfilled is Jesus, when he comes back, he's not only going to take us somewhere that's not here, but he's going to make everything new.
Everything new.
Right? He gives us new bodies. He makes this world new earth and new heaven. So I guess, if everything was good and not broken and perfect, then maybe we don't need hope. Right. Maybe also like what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13. He said at the end of that chapter, what was it? Faith, right? It was faith, hope, and love, right? But only love remains. Because when the perfect comes, when Jesus comes back, we won't need faith anymore. We don't need to look forward to anything anymore because we will be in it. Right. So only love remains. That's good. And I think I can't remember exactly when this phrase was first kind of introduced, but I think it's true. It was kind of cliche, I think, growing up, because I heard it all the time, but I think it's true. Everyone's got this God-shaped hole in their heart. And say what you will about that statement. It's true. There's this longing, and I think whether or not we or people know exactly what it is. I think if everybody were really, really honest, we know that there's something inside of us that's missing. Something isn't right. And we look for ways to fill that void. That something's missing. There's got to be something more to this life. Exactly. The searching for the meaning of life. That's why we ask questions like that. It's that there's something bigger that I need to and want to be part of. Bigger than just my jobs or the chores. Right. And so even in the daily mundane things, we like to attach that kind of meaning to.
And even Paul said, if we as Christians only have hope for this life, we are to be pitied above all else, and so, I think all of our aspirations, all of our achievements, if it's for this life only, then it's not complete. And that's not to say we should disregard this life. That's not what I don't think that's the message of the Bible. But if it's for this life only, and so I think again, just everyone deep down has this hope. And so you talked a little bit about some of the different things that people put their hope in, maybe mistakenly, that, there are some inherently, sinful things that people, find themselves, but there's some, not necessarily sinful things, but, when you place the hope in the wrong things, it becomes detrimental. So what are some of those things that we can mistakenly put our hope in?
Yeah.
And why does that end up being unhealthy or detrimental?
Yeah. I think a few of the examples I mentioned was like money, right? Your status, your influence, maybe your jobs, stuff like that, to like your relationships.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why, because none of these things are bad, like you said, right? They're not inherently evil, and we need those things. And really, all those things can be a blessing from the Lord. But there's a very fine line, when we put our hope in these things other than Jesus. Essentially, they become idols. That's what really is happening.
Yeah.
Right? Because then we're looking to my wealth, right? My possessions or my spouse to fill that God-sized hole.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To give us that satisfaction, to give us the meaning, to help us feel secure, whatever. Right? And so, and at the end of the day, like, none of these things are able to deliver that. Yeah. Right? They're not able to fully satisfy us. They're not able to give us the lasting security that we need in this life, and these things, although they can be part of that, right? So yeah, I think that's essentially what happens, is that they turn into idols. And like I said yesterday, when we put our hope in these things or our circumstances, we end up trying to control them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what idols essentially are. Is that they're these little gods that are fashioned after my own image, right? My own desires, and so they're easy to hang on to because I can manipulate them, right? Because I can control them. They do what I want them to do, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it turns into a worship of self.
Yeah.
Hoping in myself.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's kind of scary when you put it that way.
It really, well, it is. And I think what I have learned over the years of being here is that when you see some kind of controlling behavior, there's a fear behind that. Fear always equals control. And so we have to, I think, really be willing to be honest with ourselves. Or say, Holy Spirit, would you reveal any wicked way within me?
Absolutely.
Search me and know my heart, oh God. And to think, what am I afraid of? What is it that I'm afraid of, and therefore I'm putting my hope in money. Yeah, I'm putting money. I'm putting my hope in what I can achieve, my success, my career. My worth is put in my title, my position, or I'm putting hope in this person. That's just that kind of a hope God never designed, right? Because only God can really satisfy that kind of provision, whether it's And
I think we can go back to the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis 2 and 3, right? The whole thing about don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I think it's very similar what Adam and Eve did, right? By taking hold of that fruit, they're essentially saying, we don't want to put our hope in you anymore, God, right? We think it'd be better for us to have control over what is good and what is not, right? We think we can do a better job to give meaning to our existence in our life.
That's good.
To give satisfaction to our lives, right? And so, I think there's that similarity there. We see that in
Well, and what happened when they ate the fruit, right? Their eyes were open, they realized they were naked, and they covered themselves. And what was Adam's response to God? I heard you coming, I was afraid, so I hid.
Exactly.
It's just it's right there. That I think we can sometimes easily kind of skip past some of those things, but we realize hopefully sooner rather than later, but we realize that we do the same things.
Yeah.
It might look
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
The symptom might appear different on the surface, but
Yes.
it's still hiding.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, how when we come to this point where we have our hope in Jesus as the author, perfecter of our faith, for not just this life, but for eternity. How does that affect our life here and now? What does it look like when you have, when we are walking in that kind of hope? How does life change? How does and not necessarily circumstances, but our inner our inner being, right? How does that change when we have that hope? What does that look like?
Yeah. I think in a very practical sense, joy and peace will abound, right? Regardless of our circumstances. I think that's one of the outcomes of that. To live in not just that perspective, but in that reality. Right. I mentioned yesterday in my message of that story of the disciples and Jesus crossing over the sea, right? Through the storm. And the disciples they're scared.
They're freaking out.
And they're calling to Jesus, and Jesus calms the storm. And I made this comment that the disciples, they didn't realize that it's a whole lot safer to be with Jesus in the middle of the storm than to be without him on a calm sea, right? So I think that's the picture here. Because again, like our life is going to be filled with all kinds of turmoils. But if we know that, for one, our eternity is secured, right? That Jesus has guaranteed. And I talked about that too. The sealing of the Holy Spirit, he's the deposit, the guarantee of that eternal inheritance. When we know that's our direction, what we can wait upon, that he's trustworthy, right? And then I mean, there's really nothing to be afraid of in this life, right? And there's more that he promised. I also mentioned about believing that he's present with us, even right now, right? He's present with you in the middle of the storm. Right. Then again, regardless of the circumstances, you can live with joy. You can live in peace. I think that, it's really hard. It's very contradicting, right? That how can you be calm and not freak out when life is falling apart? But that's, I think, one of the biggest differences between a Christian and a non-Christian, because the non-believers, their hope is dependent on their circumstances. While for us, that's not the case, or that shouldn't be the case.
Jesus talked about if the wise person builds their house on the rock. When the waves crash and the waters rise, their house will stand firm. And I'm reminded of a preacher who's guest speaking this many years ago at Freedom, and he was talking about that same story of Jesus and the disciples going into the sea, and the storms came up, and it was interesting because Jesus said, we're going to go to the other side of the lake. We're going to cross the lake. So it was almost as if the promise was there. We're going to get to the other side. There you go. And yet they still face the storm in the middle, right? And I think that holds true in life. And when we have that hope and that promise that we're going to get to the other side, we're going to cross the lake, and we know that it's not because of our own efforts, our own strength, our own wisdom, our own whatevers. It's because Jesus is in the boat with us. He's the one who can calm the storms. And so whether we face storms or not, we know that Jesus promised we're going to cross to the other side. We're going to get to the other side. We can have hope in that. We can, and that's where that joy and that peace comes from. And it's hard. It's hard when you see the lightning and the rains and the giant waves threatening to capsize the boat. It's so hard because that's what our eyes can see. We see the circumstances. And so it really does take that exercise of faith. And
even that too, knowing that Jesus is on the boat, even if he does not calm the storm, you will get to the other side. Right. If that's what he's promised. And so that's something that we have to reckon with. And that's the whole bit when I was talking about seeking him in the midst of waiting. In prayer, we ask the Holy Spirit to help us align ourselves, our will to His, so that we're not just asking for the outcome that we want. Right. And another point is that, like you said, those waves and wind and the storm is going to be scary, and we're going to flip. We're going to lose it from time to time.
Yeah.
And you know what? At the end of the day, that might be our natural reaction, but as long as we go to Jesus, right? That's the thing, is like the disciples could have just gone on and be crazy in the boat by themselves, but at least they went to Jesus.
Yeah.
That's
a good point.
Right? They went and woke him up.
Right.
And I think that's what we forget to do sometimes. You're in the midst of some kind of, circumstance that's challenging, that's beyond yourself. It's okay at the end of the day to lose your marbles a little bit.
Yeah.
Go to Jesus.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Go to Jesus. That's what we need. That's what He wants. And that's where the pieces come from. Peace is going to come from.
Yeah.
So I think that's
that's good. No, and I like, we've kind of not really dived into this aspect, but I love you've mentioned a couple times it's the waiting.
Yeah.
When you hope for something, you wait for it, and it's no coincidence that it's we're at Christmas time, and so you get kids who are excited about presents, and they have a hard time waiting for it. But when you hope for something, you wait for it.
Yeah.
And I think the temptation that we have is I want it now. I want the peace. I want the circumstance to change, and I want it now. And so the temptation, just like Adam and Eve, is that I'm gonna see the fruit. I'm gonna see the good thing, and I'm gonna take it because I'm afraid that God's holding out on me or withholding.
Exactly.
And so instead of waiting patiently for it, and I'm reminded of David in Psalm, I think it's 40 maybe, but he says, like a weaned child, my soul is quiet and patient before you. And I think that's what's hard oftentimes about hope. It's and again, at the same time, Jesus promised that He would give it.
That's right.
He would give us that hope. He would give us that joy and give us that peace. And so I think at really in any time of life, but especially at Christmas time, it is physically as well as maybe spiritually too, but just the darkest time of the year.
That's true.
When we just the daylight hours are just not as long. We have a lot of darkness, and metaphorically, spiritually speaking, when we have a lot of darkness in our world, we have that hope to hang on to and to cling to, and to resist that temptation to craft idols for ourselves that we can, like you said, we can control. We can take what we think is good, what we think will satisfy, what we think will bring us that peace, that satisfaction, that fulfillment. But to really wait on the hope and remember that this world is not our home. So I know we're kind of running short on time. I'm really trying not to talk too much. It's a really great. Again, it seems so simple, but it's so full of richness and impact for our lives. If somebody is listening to this, or maybe they heard your message and say, I need that hope. I need to have that hope in my life, for any number of reasons. What would you encourage somebody to do who's looking for that kind of a hope?
I mean, I would repeat what I said in the message, really. First and foremost, the most important thing is that you come to the Lord. You come to Jesus. And again, maybe you don't have a relationship with Jesus. Maybe you've heard about Him, but you really don't, you're not walking with Him. He's not real in your life. And if that's you, I hope today you don't delay. You come to Him like all those sick people that I mentioned. Those stories in the gospel yesterday. They were desperate. They knew they were desperate. They were willing to admit it and own it, and they came to Jesus. And when you come to Jesus, He will never turn you away. So come to Him, and that there's no magical prayer that you need to pray. You just simply tell Him. Tell Him in your own words, like you would tell another person, your desperation and your need for Him, and ask Him to come into your life and to save you and to to be your Lord. And so I think that has to be the first step. You know, it goes back to rebuilding that trust with Jesus. And on the other hand, I would also emphasize the need for community, because the church family, the church body is where we can tangibly, experience just that joy and peace, and that comes from the Lord. And so, it's always helpful when you're going through hard times to have a brother or sister to remind you that, hey, don't forget, Jesus is with you.
Yep.
He is with you, even though you may not feel like it, but he is with you in the midst of the storms. So it's important.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm reminded too of just, the verse that says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And if anyone would open the door, I will come in and make my home and make my dwelling inside of them. And so I think that's good, because, and I can't help but wonder if there are people who think, people who don't know Jesus.
Yeah.
I've got to do. There's a lot that I need to do before Jesus will accept me or live with me or whatever. And yet he's right there.
Yeah,
he's right there, and he's, like you said, he wants us to come to him. Just like the disciples in the boat in the storm. He wants us to come to him. He's eagerly waiting for you to open the door.
And I think also, ironically, until we are willing to admit to Jesus that I am utterly hopeless, and I am a sinner who cannot help myself in any way, that is the right posture.
Yep.
That is the point where you are really ready to receive Jesus. No, you're right.
And that's the disciples. Jesus, we are going to drown.
Yeah,
we are going.
If you don't do anything,
we are going down. And that's hard. It takes some humility, but at the same time, I think we all know that deep down. Like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, we all know somewhere deep inside of us something's not right. And if we're willing to just admit that we are, and I love how you just said that, we are utterly hopeless without him. I mean, those aren't his arms are so wide open.
Yes.
So, well, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk about your message. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Monday Moments. We hope that you got something out of this. If you have, please let us know. Drop us a comment, send us an email, however you can. We always love to hear from you. And we hope that this is going to be an amazing time of Advent, Christmas. It's one of my favorite times of the year for sure, and is just going to be full of these reminders of hope and peace and the coming of Jesus, and not just the first time, but the second time. So thank you so much again for joining us for another episode of Monday Moments. We will see you next week.